And welcome back. We have a rear caliper that came off of a 1991 Honda CRX, and today we're going to rebuild it. The nice thing about this rear caliper is that it isn't exclusive to the CRX. Honda and Acura have been using the same general design for many years on a variety of different vehicles such as the CRX, CRZ, Civic, Del Sol, Fit, Integra, RSX, and I'm sure there's another handful of vehicles that they've also been using it on. You would have to just make sure you're ordering the correct rebuild kit for your application. As you can see, I have the caliper and the caliper bracket removed because I just want to refresh both of them. Now, the first thing I'm going to remove is the bleeder valve, and as you can see, I have a 12 point and a 6 point wrench here. Now you want to use a 6 point for this because these bleeder valves are usually rusted in place and it's very easy to round them off. So using a 6 point just gives you that little bit of extra advantage. Most of the fasteners on the caliper are going to be rusted in place, so a quick tip is to remove them or at least loosen them while your caliper is still attached to your car. It's just going to make things a lot easier. And now I'm just removing the banjo bolt, which you should not have to worry about this because in order to remove the caliper, you have to remove this bolt in order to remove the brake hose. Unless of course you cut the brake hose. At that point you just opened up another can of worms. Now I thought I noticed something weird about this banjo bolt, and sure enough I was right. There's actually 3 crush washers on here when there should only be 2. So I'm not sure about the previous owner of this caliper, but it's really sketchy and it's not safe at all. And if I remember correctly, this fastener right here is one of 2 that hold down a bracket for the handbrake. And of course you want to have something underneath the caliper because it is going to be dripping out brake fluid and you don't want to get that stuff everywhere. To avoid having to use an impact on this nut, just do what I mentioned previously about loosening everything while the caliper is still on the car, and again you shouldn't have any problems. Now I'm using a set of pliers to remove this spring right here, but I actually found out it's not a very strong spring at all. You could actually compress it with your fingers, so you don't need pliers to remove it. And now that the nut is removed, we could just wiggle the bracket back and forth until it comes off. Now we're going to try to remove the piston out of the caliper. I have 2 different tools here and you're not going to need both of them. In fact, you really don't need any of them, but I'm going to demonstrate how the tools work. And you cannot remove the piston using the tool because the caliper itself interferes with it. So the tool is mainly just to get things started. And once you get the piston moving, you could actually remove it with a set of needle nose pliers. And here goes that second tool I was talking about. Basically the same exact thing. It's just to get things started. You're not going to be able to remove the piston completely with it. Now if your piston is seized in place and you're having a difficult time removing it, a great tip is while it's still attached to your brake hose on your car, just push your brake pedal very slowly and that pressure should be more than enough to push that piston out. And this is what I was talking about earlier, that really you don't need any of those tools to remove the piston, because as long as the piston isn't stuck or seized in place, you should be able to grab a set of needle nose pliers and turn it counterclockwise and the piston should come out completely. The more I dig into this caliper, it's starting to make me think that this caliper was either new or recently remanufactured, because all of the seals seem to be in great condition. Looking at the piston now that it's out, it also looks like it's in great condition. Now if you have any type of pitting on your piston like this right here, typically it's junk. It's not going to be able to work properly, so at that point you're either going to have to buy a new piston. But the pistons can sometimes be expensive, and if it's too expensive you're better off just buying a whole new caliper. And now we can remove this inner O-ring using our pick. Now if you look at this O-ring, you could tell that it's different from the rest. It's not rounded off, it's a square cut O-ring, and it has a very important role to play inside the caliper. It's the one that prevents the brake fluid from getting past the piston, and this is why it's important that your piston has no pitting or anything like that, because it has to create a very good seal to prevent that brake fluid from leaking out. Now as you can see, I'm using a pick to try to remove this inner snap ring, and that's only because I can't seem to find my snap ring pliers. I have a set of 4, and like always, the one that you need is the one that's missing. So I'm trying to just use the pick, and eventually I did get it out. And of course, you just want to inspect everything, and mainly just try to remember the order that everything goes in. You want to put it back exactly the way it came out. And as for this, I'm using a wire wheel here, but the wire wheel isn't very abrasive. It's actually like a very soft one. So I'm just trying to clean out that groove where that square cut O-ring fits in, just to try to get any debris out of there. And now there's one final piece that we have to remove from inside the caliper, but there's really nothing to grab onto it with, so I'm using a 90-degree angle pick here, and I'm just kind of wedging it in because, like I said, there really isn't anything to grab onto, and it just doesn't want to come out. You could turn the caliper over and bang it on your table as much as you want, but it just won't fall out. So mainly I'm just wedging it in there and then pulling back at the same time, and eventually it does pop out. And here's what I was doing to try to get this piece out. I just wanted to show you up close just so you know exactly what I'm talking about. So just kind of go it and at an angle and just kind of wedge it in there as you pull back. And as you can see, there's a small piece back here that's just kind of stuck in here with grease. And mine's came out with this cap, but if yours is still stuck inside of the caliper, you simply just have to turn your caliper over, just give it a bang or two, and it should fall right out. And now we can finally remove this piece back here that actuates the handbrake, and we can remove the rubber seal as well. Unfortunately, my rebuild kit does not include this rubber seal back here, so I'm gonna have to reuse mine, but there are plenty of kits online that do include this seal, so just keep an eye out for that. And replacing this O-ring is very simple. You just have to take the old one off and simply put the new one on. And next we have to replace this one. Now this one's a little bit different. It's got like a slice on one side, for lack of a better term. If you look at this side right here, it's got like this cut in it, and if you turn it around, this side's perfectly flat. So the side with the cut in it is the one that's gonna go on first. So basically you want the flat side facing out. Now that all of the O-rings are replaced here, I'm just going to grab some fresh grease and apply it to all of the locations where I cleaned off the old grease. And here's an extra step that I'm taking. I don't think you have to do this, but I'm going to take it apart anyways just for the sake of the video. This is the piston, and there's really nothing inside of here that needs to be replaced or refurbished or anything like that. But anyway, I'm going to take off this snap ring so you can see exactly what's inside and clean it up if you like. As you can see, there is some type of grease inside of here, but I'm just gonna go ahead and clean this up. And the grease that I'm using is wheel bearing grease. I'm not sure if it's the correct grease to use for this. It's just what I'm using. So just go ahead and do your own research on that if you like. But as you can see, everything's all cleaned up for the most part. I'm gonna go ahead and apply some grease. You don't want to go too crazy with it. Basically the same amount of grease that you saw in there, that's pretty much what you want to replace. And I'm just gonna go ahead and reassemble all of this. Now this can be pretty tricky to put back together. If you're just gonna try to push down on that spring to get the snap ring in, it's really not gonna happen. So a trick that I found that works really well is to get a socket, and it's gonna fit right over that snap ring perfectly, and you just compress it with a set of large pliers like this, and the snap ring is just gonna snap right into place, and that's it. Now that I have this piston completely reassembled, I'm just going to go ahead and fill it up with some fresh brake fluid. There's no real reason for doing any of this. It just might be a few days before I could get all of this reassembled into the caliper. So this piston is going to be sitting off to the side for a few days. And now all of the fun begins of trying to clean the rust off of the caliper, because I'm just trying to get it to look nice so I could repaint it. Obviously I tried the wire wheel thing. Maybe the wire wheel I was using wasn't that aggressive, but it didn't seem to do any justice. Then I tried this rust dissolver gel. Now after 30 minutes, which is what it says on the instructions, it should start working. I checked it at 30 minutes and nothing was happening. So I gave it a few more hours. Obviously we're at 12 hours now and still nothing. It did not work. It just left me with a large mess to clean up. So that was an epic fail. And the last test that I wanted to try was actually white vinegar. I've seen some things online, people saying that white vinegar works well for rust. So I put everything inside of this bucket here, and I filled it up with the white vinegar, and I left it for several hours. There you go, exactly over 20 hours sitting inside this bucket. I pulled it out and tried to wire brush it, and nothing was really coming off, so that didn't seem to work either. I'm just using a baking soda to try to neutralize the acids, and now I'm trying to focus on the caliper bracket. Now the slide pins are pretty much seized in place, so this is why I have it mounted in the vise. These things should be able to move freely, but they are just completely stuck. The one on the right side isn't as bad. It's the one on the left side. It's completely seized in place to the point where I even have to use a torch on it. Now with the caliper bracket and the caliper itself completely disassembled, I could sandblast all of it to make it look like new once again, and it's coming out great. Now here's the caliper hanging. I've already given it a first coat of primer, and I'm using red caliper paint here. As you can see, the paint looks nice and shiny. It's coming out well. Here's the bracket once again. Before I paint it, I just want to make sure I get all of the dirt and grime outside of this this bore right here, right where the pins go in, because the pins should be able to slide in freely like this one is here, but the one on the left side, as you can see, it's not really going. So I'm just gonna have to come in here with some sort of attachment on my drill and just try to clean up as much as I can inside of there, just to the point where the slide pin goes in and out easily. And now that the paint is completely dry on the caliper, you can start reassembling everything. Now just keep in mind, you want to reassemble this in the reverse order that you took it apart. So basically the last part that you took off is the first thing you want to start with. Now my opinion on this caliper paint is it's just a gimmick. I don't buy into it, because as far as I'm concerned, it's no different from just regular old spray paint. I'm not sure why they advertise it as caliper paint, because the second brake fluid hits it, it completely takes the paint off. So yeah, I'm not really impressed with this paint at all. If you want a durable finish, something that's gonna last on your caliper and look nice, there really is no substitute for powder coating. So if you're serious about your calipers looking nice, just I'd recommend getting them powder coated. And the good news is that I actually found my snap ring pliers, so I'm pretty excited about that. And I'm going to use the pliers to just get the snap ring right past this square cut seal. And anything beyond that, you're not really going to be able to get your snap ring pliers any further unless you have like some really deep snap ring pliers. But what we're going to do here to get the snap ring in is pretty much the same method that we use for the piston, where we use the socket to compress and get the snap ring in place. So you could do that here, but I just ended up using a flathead screwdriver and just pushing it and working my way all the way around until that snap ring just kind of fell into place. Now when you're putting in this piston, you want to make sure it's lubricated, and I found the easiest method for getting this piece. This is probably the trickiest part out of all of it. So you want to put this seal on, or this dust boot cover, right at the edge of the piston, and it's really tricky. It's gonna fall off plenty of times, and it's just gonna have to, trial and error. But it did take me a few tries, but eventually I got it. And once you get it seated in on the caliper itself, then you can start twisting the piston in. And now that I'm all done painting the caliper bracket, I have a set of new dust boots for it. So I'm going to go ahead and install these first. I am going to put a little bit of grease inside of them. You do not want to go crazy with the grease because you don't want it trapped underneath the slide pin. It'll prevent the slide pin from completely being able to bottom out inside of its bore. Another thing is the grease that's being used here is a synthetic caliper grease. You don't want to use any type of like wheel bearing grease because it will turn into like some sort of a real tacky goop, and it's not gonna let the slide pins do their job. And now I'm gonna mount the caliper to the caliper bracket. The slide pins did come in new bolts, so that's what I'm gonna use. Now if your caliper is going directly back on your car, you don't have to mount this up how I'm doing here. I'm simply just assembling it because I don't have any plans of putting it on a car anytime soon. And of course, I picked up a brand new bleeder valve. It is not included in a rebuild kit, so I did have to purchase it separately, but I just thought it would be a nice touch. When you're tightening this thing down, just give it a nice little snug. Don't overdo it because it's really easy to strip them. And now you can install the bracket for the emergency handbrake. Now this nut and washer here, I was not able to get them sandblasted simply because I ran out of time. But after the video was done, I did take them back off again to get them sandblasted and painted. Now like I mentioned earlier, this spring right here is very easy to compress with your fingers, and you go ahead and get it installed just like that, and make sure you tighten it down. And you want to make sure to always put a cap on top of your bleeder valve. You don't want any type of debris to get into there. And that's it for now. So don't forget to hit me up on Instagram, Patreon, all that social media garbage. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you're considering subscribing, don't forget to hit that notification bell. And like always, thanks for watching.